everyone, in this video we'll be talking about modernism and postmodernism. In what ways are these two approaches similar, and what are also their key characteristics? Modernism and postmodernism are movements which were greatly influenced by events like world wars, industrialization, and urbanization. They reflect the insecurities, disorientation, and fragmentation of the 20th century. Some scholars describe these two literary movements emerged during the Enlightenment period or the Age of Reason. Now, the changes that occurred in human life through world events also changed the way writers and philosophers approach literature. Modernism and postmodernism differs in the way they look at society and progress. Modernism and postmodernism are two distinct cultural and intellectual movements that have significant impact on society. While both movements emerged in the 20th century, they have different perspectives. The difference between modernism and postmodernism in literature depends on their themes, their literary and narrative techniques. For modernism, in ways on how they see society, they embraced the idea of progress and believed in the possibility of achieving a better society through rationality, science, and technological advancement. On the other hand, postmodernism challenged the idea of progress. It emphasized the relativity and subjectivity of truth. Postmodernism rejects the idea of a fixed truth or an ideal society. For this time, we will have our focus on modernism. It emerged in the late 19th and early 20th century. It is described as a departure from traditional forms and conventions. Now, writers during this period actively tried to make sense on rapidly changing society. So the change in society contributed to the change in their form and techniques in writing. As a result, different narrative styles and philosophical standpoints emerge. This approach embraces new and experimental techniques. Now, we will have the key characteristics of modernism in literature. Firstly, experimentation with form and style. Now, this modernism in literature, writers often challenge traditional narrative structures. Okay? So what are traditional narrative structures? These are the common frameworks or patterns that have been used for a long time by past or previous writers during storytelling. Example, the writer would use a chronological order or a sequence of events in presenting the story, like having the introduction followed by the rising action, the climax, falling action, and the resolution. So that is an example of a traditional narrative structure. Another, a hero's journey, for example, the Odyssey, wherein our character is Odysseus. Okay, so the pattern there is that the hero embarks on a transformative journey, then faces challenges, then meeting mentors and allies, and ultimately returning home with a valuable reward. So that is an example of a traditional narrative structure. But in modernism, writers challenged and departed from traditional narrative structures because they experimented with unconventional forms of storytelling. In here, writers played with fragmented narratives, nonlinear timelines, multiple perspectives, and stream of consciousness. What are fragmented narratives? This is also known as the nonlinear narratives, wherein the structures deviate from the traditional linear storytelling. Now, in this approach, the writer presents fragments or pieces of story wherein the reader must be the one to put the pieces together to form a cohesive whole. Now, other examples, we have multiple perspectives. In this manner, the story is told from different perspectives or viewpoints of the characters. Another is the use of flashback or flash forwards, wherein in the narrative it jumps back and forth in time. Number 2 is the subjectivity and interiority. It focuses on the inner thoughts, emotions, and consciousness of the writers, of the characters. Okay? So the writers here include the inner thoughts, emotions of the characters in writing the story, wherein they explore the complexities of the human psychology. It portrayed characters with conflicting desires, doubts, and uncertainties. It is the stream of consciousness. It is a narrative technique that attempts to depict the flow of thoughts, feelings, sensations on the mind of the character. So this stream of consciousness allows the reader to experience the character's inner thoughts, associations, even memories and emotions in a more intimate and immediate way. Third is the rejection of traditional themes and values. So this modernism in literature questioned and rejected traditional beliefs, values, and societal norms. Often depicted delusionment, alienation. By alienation, we mean that the theme or the concept involved is that the characters may have a feeling of being disconnected, isolated from the society, or being out of place. By disillusionment, it portrayed the disappointment, the despair, the loss of faith of the characters. Fourth is emphasis of individualism and self-expression. Modernism celebrated the individual and explored the unique experiences, perspectives, and identities of characters. It emphasized the importance of self-expression and personal freedom. Okay? Fifth is the intertextuality and allusions. Writers frequently made references to other literary works, historical events, and cultural symbols. We say intertextuality. It means that the writers base their texts or their stories from other writings. So it is a relationship between different texts. So the text exists not in isolation, but is influenced and shaped by texts that came before it. They incorporated intertextuality and allusions to create layers of meaning and engage with a broader cultural context. According to T.S. Eliot on his essay entitled Tradition and the Individual Talent, Eliot argues that the poet's work should not be evaluated solely based on their personal emotions or experiences, but rather on their ability to engage with and contribute to the literary tradition that came before them. Okay, so he emphasizes the importance of historical context and the collective wisdom of past writers. So modernism embraces the notion that no text comes from isolation. Okay, we mean that a text may have a connection from previous narratives or texts. Now let's have this as an example. We will be using modernism approach for us to explain the Metamorphosis written by Franz Kafka. Metamorphosis, modernist lens. It presents the bizarre transformation of Gregor Samsa, which is the main character, into a giant insect without providing a clear explanation. So with this pattern, we can see that it deviated from the traditional structure, wherein in the traditional structure, the writer would really begin with giving the details of how a particular event came into being. But in this example, the main character became a giant insect without providing the reason or a clear explanation of why it happened. Therefore, it promotes a sense of alienation experienced by individuals in the rapidly changing world, which is one of the characteristics of the modernism approach. It dives into inner thoughts and emotions of the character, portraying his isolation, despair, and breakdown of his relationship with his family. This time we will have the postmodernism. Postmodernism emerged in the mid-20th century as a reaction to modernism. Postmodern ideas offer a sharp commentary on the evolution of the capitalist society to its present stage. This literary movement is characterized by a skepticism toward grand narratives. What are grand narratives? These are stories and ideologies that attempts to explain and make sense of the world or the human existence. So these are those texts, narratives, or which attempts to establish universal truth of meaning. Example, religious and mythological narratives or stories. Those explain origins of the universe or the purpose of human existence. Myths, even the Bible. That's an example for religious narratives. In postmodernism, they reject those kind of perspective when it comes to literary writing. A focus on the fragmentation of knowledge, a playful and self-referential approach. What are the key characteristics of postmodernism in literature? Number one, it's fragmentation and intertextuality. From the first key characteristic, we can say that they are similar with the modernism. So, both modernism and postmodernism apply fragmentation, which means that they deviated from the traditional writing structure, and intertextuality, which means that they also refer from other texts. This often incorporates fragmented narratives, multiple perspectives, which means that they go into the thoughts, emotions of the different characters and not just focusing on one. Also, a non-linear storytelling wherein they may use flashback, they may have flash forward wherein they go back and forth in delivering the narrative. It embraces the intertextuality, referencing and incorporates elements from other texts, popular culture, and historical events. Second is the metafiction and self-reflexivity. It draws attention to artificiality of storytelling, okay? And it challenges the boundaries between fiction and reality. It engages in metafiction, wherein the text becomes self-aware and refers to its own construction. The third is the deconstruction of the grand narratives. Okay? It rejects the idea of a single universal truth and grand narrative. Postmodernism do not go into narratives which promotes a standard or an ideal society. It questions and deconstructs traditional ideologies, cultural norms, and power structures. Also, postmodernism emphasizes the multiplicity of perspectives. Therefore, there is no single truth, but people may have different perspective or ideas of a particular concept. It's irony and humor. Now, postmodernism employs irony and humor. They may have satire to challenge and subvert established norms and expectations. It uses wit and playfulness to critique societal or cultural institution. So this kind of writing may give a critic, may employ critiquing in its narrative, playfulness about the societal, cultural, and established norms and expectations. Fourth, emphasis on subjectivity and identity. This explores the subjective nature of reality and the construction of identity. It highlights the influence of language, power, and social constructs in shaping individual experiences and identities. Now, according to Roland Barthes' essay entitled The Death of the Author, the meaning of a literary work is not fixed and determined solely by the author's intention. Okay? So again, for postmodernism, a text, the meaning of the text is not fixed by having only the author's intention, but it is created through the interaction between the text and the reader. So the focus should shift from the author to the reader, wherein the reader is the one who actively participates in the creation of meaning. So the readers are the ones who are actually giving the meaning, creating the meaning of the narrative, not the author. So from the title itself, the death of the author. Okay? You may have a multiple interpretation. So a multiple interpretation is open to the reader's subjective engagement. Now, our example is The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. The Lottery is a thought-provoking short story that can be analyzed using the lens of postmodernism. First, it challenges traditional narrative structures and societal forms. Second, the deconstruction of grand narratives and questioning the established norms. Why? Why can we say that it questions established norms? The story is about a small town wherein there is an annual lottery. Okay? So as the story unfolds, the reader will then realize that the lottery is a brutal tradition wherein the chosen name or the chosen person will be stoned to death. The story critiques the norm of that particular small town, wherein it uses irony and satire. Okay, Jackson, our author, uses lottery as a metaphor for blind adherence to traditional and conformity. So in this narrative, we can see that the characters just follow the lottery as a ritual, as they conform to this tradition. So they practice casual acceptance of the lottery's violence and participation on ritual highlight, wherein if we will use postmodernism approach, they reject grand narratives and they question relevance of a particular custom in a particular society or a particular background of a story. That's the end of our discussion about modernism and postmodernism. Thank you for your attention.